This is 1A. I'm Joshua Johnson in Washington. The CDC says that overdose deaths linked to prescription opioids were numbered more than 218,000 since the addiction crisis began in the late 90s. State and local governments have filed more than 2,000 lawsuits claiming that Purdue Pharma, the company that makes OxyContin, played a central role in marketing opioid medications. Today, NPR reports that the Sackler family, which owns Purdue Pharma, has agreed to give up the entire value of the privately owned firm to settle these claims. Will that be enough for those demanding justice for those who suffered? Joining us now to discuss it is Josh Stein. He's the Attorney General of the state of North Carolina, one of several state attorneys general who's been directly involved in negotiations surrounding Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. Josh, welcome to the program.
Joshua, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We did reach out to Purdue Pharma. They declined to offer any comments beyond the statements they'd already provided to NPR, which we'll get into in just a moment. But, Mr. Attorney General, where do things stand right now in terms of these negotiations?
Well, I think we're at a bit of an impasse. But before we get into the details of the negotiations, I really want to help set the context for your listeners, because people hear about the opioid crisis, but I don't know that folks fully appreciate how devastating it is, that it's the number one cause of accidental death. The United States has had declining life expectancy in each of the last 3 years, the only industrialized nation in the world to experience that. First time it's happened in 100 years, since World War I and the influenza epidemic of 1918. So people are dying. Too many North Carolinians are dying. Too many families are suffering. Too many communities are struggling. And it didn't just happen innocently. This is a result of drug manufacturers and drug distributors callously pursuing their profits at the expense of people's lives. And those companies that played a role in creating this epidemic must be held accountable and must contribute to cleaning up the mess that they created.
Are there particular parts of North Carolina, certain North Carolinians who've been hit the hardest by this epidemic?
It's actually very well distributed, for good or for ill. It is all over the state, from Wilmington at the coast to Hickory in the foothills, Asheville in the mountains, and in the big cities like Charlotte and Raleigh. So it's everywhere, and there are very few families whose lives have not been touched by it.
You and other state attorneys general previously had suspected that Purdue Pharma would file bankruptcy rather than offering up personal wealth to settle the lawsuits. Now it looks like that's changed. What's your take on where things stand right now?
Well, I think Purdue has played as great a role of any single company in creating this epidemic, and the Sackler family has directed the actions of Purdue over the last 20 years. They aggressively pursued marketing and sales, misrepresenting the addictive nature of their drugs. And then when it started becoming apparent that people were actually getting addicted, Richard Sackler, one of the family members, said, we have to hammer the abusers at every way possible, make them the culprits. And then a few years ago, they actually created an initiative called Project Tango, in which they saw a growth industry in drug treatment. And they thought, well, heck, let's now go. There are all these people who are addicted to our product. Now let's sell them the medicine they need in order to deal with the treatment. So they wanted to get money coming and going. Our view is that Purdue Pharma needs to go away. It needs to no longer exist. But that the Sackler family, which has extracted billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars over the last 20 years, needs to have some skin in the game. And that's what we're pushing for right now.
It sounds like you're suing this drug maker as if it's a drug dealer.
Well, I will leave people's analysis to themselves, but they make a lot of money.
You're asking for Purdue Pharma to disappear. You're trying to break up the entire enterprise. If I was a DEA agent and I caught El Chapo, that's exactly what I would want from him, to break the whole thing up. It sounds the same.
Well, this is a company that has proven itself incapable of behaving responsibly.
We are speaking to Josh Stein, the Attorney General of North Carolina. We welcome your questions and thoughts as well, especially if you are in the Carolinas or anywhere across the country that's been affected by this crisis. What do you want to see come out of this legal fight? What do you think would represent justice, if indeed justice can be done for the lives that have already been affected? Email us 1a@wamu.org, tweet us at 1a, or comment on our Facebook page. Let me add one more voice to the conversation as soon as I read part of the statement that was released to NPR. On Sunday, Purdue Pharma said it, quote, believes a settlement that benefits the American public now is a far better path than years of wasteful litigation and appeals. Those negotiations continue, and we remain dedicated to a resolution that genuinely advances the public interest, unquote. That's part of a statement from Purdue Pharma. Let's get some reaction to that statement from Lenny Bernstein. He's a health and medicine reporter for the Washington Post, and he joins us here in studio. Lenny, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
If Purdue Pharma is pushing for a settlement, it obviously knows that litigation could be long and arduous, but my guess is you don't settle unless you know that losing would cost you way more.
Yes. Now, losing would cost you way more in terms of what might happen for years and years after you didn't settle, which is you would have lawyers going after your personal wealth for as many years as it takes. Once it became clear that the plaintiffs in this case wanted the Sacklers to have some skin in the game, as the Attorney General just said, it became incumbent on them to try to offer some. And the question right now is how much?
Now, with regards to that skin in the game, there's the $4.5 billion that have been offered to settle these lawsuits. The Sackler family itself has also offered $3 billion in cash as part of what it calls a global resolution, and it's offered to contribute $1.5 billion from the sale of an international drug conglomerate it owns called Mundi Pharma. Does that sound, Josh, like a sufficient deal? What's the reaction been to that offer?
Well, I think that people do believe that Purdue needs to go into bankruptcy, where it can be subject to some liquidation trust, where the value of that company can go to essentially to pay for all the states, cities, counties, plaintiffs who have been injured by the company's behavior. But we would very much be interested in having the Sackler family out of the opioid business across the entire globe as well. And so selling their international assets is an important component of any possible deal. The real rub at this point is how much commitment are the Sacklers prepared to put behind the $4.5 billion that they're putting forward. And I simply believe that given how much money they've extracted from the company, that we need more security that the states will get what Purdue represents and the Sackler family represents they would get.
Josh, I wonder if you'd answer a question from one of our listeners. Jaya Prakash emailed, what about criminal prosecution? Shouldn't the makers face penalty for causing so much death and loss?
Our legal system is very complicated. So you have state officials, you have federal officials. Different states empower their attorneys general with different authority. I only have civil authority. I don't have the ability to go prosecute someone criminally. I think that were there to be criminal charges, it would come from the U.S. Department of Justice, and I don't have insight into what U.S. DOJ is considering as it relates to the Sackler family.
If you could go after them criminally, would you?
I haven't, because I don't have the authority, I haven't done the analysis of the evidence that one would need to do in order to bring charges, so it would just not be prudent for me to comment.
Okay, that's fair enough. But Lenny, what about criminal prosecution? Have any other state attorneys general or the feds contemplated that?
Not with manufacturers of drugs. However, there in the past few months have been criminal charges brought against two small to medium-sized distributors of drugs. Miami Lucan, which is based in Ohio, and a smaller drug distributor in upstate New York. And that's really important to understand because the law makes the distributors the gatekeepers of opioids. They were the ones who were supposed to report the diversion if they witnessed it or any suspicious orders of drugs. Finally, after years and years of going after them civilly and administratively, 2 U.S. attorneys have brought criminal charges.
Josh, is there a timeline? Go ahead.
Just to add to Lenny's point, there is one manufacturer where people in the company have faced criminal prosecutions by the feds, and that's a company called Insys Therapeutics that sells a particularly highly addictive form of fentanyl, pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl, not drug street fentanyl.
There are more than 2,000 lawsuits that have been filed by state and local governments to hold Purdue Pharma accountable. Josh, what's the timeline from here? What happens now? How do we figure out where the money goes? What's kind of your best case scenario on what happens next?
It's exceptionally complicated. It's more complicated than the tobacco cases simply because those cases involve 50 states, which I can tell you is complicated in and of itself. But when then you add on thousands of local government jurisdictions represented in large measure by private plaintiffs' lawyers, it does create a great deal of complication, and there are more manufacturers and more distributors. The claims are each a little bit different. So there is no single timeline. There's not as though there's one plaintiff and one defendant. It can be easily and rationally resolved. I think what we will see is, because there are trial dates scheduled this fall, there are dates in the Cleveland multi-district litigation in federal district court involving a number of these defendants starting in October, that there is pressure on a lot of these companies to see, is there a way forward that doesn't involve litigation? And I've sued Purdue Pharma. I sued Insys Therapeutics. I'm preparing to sue the Sacklers. I will sue any of them I need to, but I'm not excited about that because litigation does take a long time, and it would be much better for society if these companies would accept their role in creating this problem, put up real money, and then we can start making people's lives better.
Garrett tweeted, as a North Carolinian who lost a good friend to opioid addiction, both Purdue Pharma and the owners should be out of business. And Claudia wrote on our Facebook page, so incredibly proud of our Attorney General of the state of North Carolina. Many of us have watched this unfold for years. Finally, there is accountability. Josh Stein is that Attorney General. Mr. Stein, thanks for talking to us.
Joshua, I enjoyed it.
We'll continue in just a